welcome to our open house, Fair Luxury open house on Provenance Power today. And we're just going to let people kind of filter in. And as people are joining, we'd love to hear, we've got a real international registration today. So please put in the chat where you're tuning in from. And also whether you're already working with certified gold or whether you're new to this conversation, I think that would be a really interesting thing for us all to share. So just to give you a bit of background, my name's Susie and I'm part of Fair Luxury. And between us all, we have actually over 60 years of experience working with certified gold. So this is something that we're really passionate about. And actually, I know that all of you will be just as horrified as we are about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it's actually highlighted a very important part of the gold supply chain. Russia has a stockpile of gold, which is estimated to be $142 billion. And it was reported in the Financial Times that this could be sold into the industry to avoid sanctions. So now, more than ever, transparent and traceable supply chains of gold are just so important. And whilst there's already projects out there, we've heard from Fairtrade and Fairmined previously, these are three new initiatives that you might not have heard of before. And actually it gives us a really unique understanding of the work that goes in before the gold even comes to market, the work that goes in on site, all the way through the whole supply chain and how that is mediated. And it's just a really interesting way of grasping what is quite a complicated subject. And I'd really like anyone who's got a question to just pop that in the chat box as well. Whether you think it's like a little silly question, something that has been kind of on your mind for a long time, just put it in the chat box. And when we've come to the end of everyone's presentations, we'll have a chance to talk through those. And if you want to know a bit more about the new sanctions with Russia and the gold stockpile, then you want to visit Global Gold Transparency Initiative. And they have done an open letter to the industry. We as Fair Luxury have signed this letter and we're going to share it in the chat box. And I'd like you to educate yourselves on that, to take the time to read that. And if you feel you're able to, then please sign it yourselves. Now, what we're focusing on, traceable supply chains. So these are supply chains where we know every player in the chain of custody. And that makes it really unique because not only do you know where your gold's coming from, you know where your money's going to as well. And actually, there is a lot of positive impact that flow of money upstream down the supply chain really has for the communities that are mining this gold. So to start us off, we have Rachel Brass from Levin Sources, who is going to be introducing the USAID's Zahabu Sasi Clean Gold Project, which is out in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. So Rachel, over to you.
Thanks very much, Susie. Hello, everyone, and very exciting to be here. Some of you will know a little bit about this project already. It will be new to others, so I'll give you a quick overview and then go into a bit more detail. We are funded by USAID, the US government. It's a 5-year project focused on sourcing responsible gold from Eastern DRC, and we're working in a consortium of led by Global Communities, a US NGO, Levin Sources, where I work, who I'm sure most of you know, based in the UK, a social enterprise looking at responsible supply chains, and then 2 partners who brought the due diligence experience, Better Chain and RCS Global, who've been really valuable in getting us off the ground. So this project is looking at 3 main objectives. Firstly, it's increasing the demand for and co-investment in responsibly sourced ASM gold. So demand piece at the bottom of the supply chain. We're also looking to increase the volume of exports of responsibly sourced ASM gold, and that in itself is complicated, increasing the supply. And then thirdly, improving the commercial viability of the cooperatives upstream. So if we look at this slide here, you can see we're really trying to pull together a whole of supply chain approach. Traditionally, projects have worked at one end or the other and haven't really pulled everything together. What we've found, and what previous US government funded projects have found, is that if you don't get all of these bits working together, the supply chain breaks down. So this idea of demand, supply and commercial viability underpinned by those really critical engagements in DRC with the government and working in partnership with all sorts of other organisations to leverage their expertise and their finance is the key objective. So we're looking to create a commercially viable supply chain that will withstand and still be there when the project ends. Very quickly then, a quick snapshot of the footprint. At the moment, and this is evolving all the time as we bring new partners in, test different ideas, test different business models and different supply chain models. But at the moment, we're working with 3 supply chains in 3 different provinces in Eastern DRC, Ituri, which you'll hear more about when Greg speaks later, Maniema and South Kivu. We're working with 3 different exporters who are partnering with the project. They're very different types of exporter as well, which I can talk about more in detail maybe when we're doing question and answers at the end. And some of our supply chains are working as an ASM, artisanal miners, in a large-scale mining concession. Others are working as an ASM on their own site. And we have been bringing to bear experience from the due diligence partners, from Levin sources who've worked along the whole length of supply chains in the past, and also global communities whose expertise is very much in cooperative development, pulling all of that expertise together. So that's the upstream bit. Downstream, also mid and downstream, we've been working with banks, local banks in particular, to try and get the pre-financing sorted, because that has been a real blockage. We've worked to create a 7-member community of practice of some interested refiners who want to get involved in these responsible supply chains. And then we've also created more recently a jewellery community. Some of you, I think, have been part of that and joined some of those meetings. 25, 30, potentially up to 60 at the moment in that community. But we want those mid and downstream members of the sector to invest in the supply chain. So on to the next slide, if you could. Thanks. So what we're trying to do is facilitate. So we're not buying the gold. We as Zahabi Safi won't be involved in the supply chain directly. It's quite different from some of the other projects you may have seen. What we're trying to do is facilitate, to bring the different people together so they can create their own commercial relationships, whether that's investing in a supply chain or it's buying from a supply chain. And that's how we see the sustainability piece coming into play. When the donor funding ends, we'll have been a catalyst, but we're not essential to the long-term running of these supply chains. So upstream, when we're trying to look at responsible sourcing, what we found is that quite a lot of the upstream partners don't really understand the downstream demands. We've been trying to work with them to increase that knowledge. That also goes for the service providers upstream, whether that's transport, logistics. The banking sector is increasingly in Congo getting involved in this and understanding the risks and the opportunities there and wanting to support responsible supply chain. So that's exciting because that does bring in this element of sustainability if we can get that properly functioning. And then I think there's also the other issue is that we're starting from quite a low base in Congo. None of these supply chains are going to be perfect, and the upstream issues, there are lots. You'll hear more about that from Greg in a minute. OECD, if you interpret it absolutely purely, encourages people to disengage very quickly if there's a problem. What we're trying to say is there are going to be problems, but you have to engage if you want to help solve those problems. So work with the partners upstream to help them solve those problems, and put a plan in place to be able to help them solve the problems, so that you can so cutting them out of the supply chain doesn't help in effect. So disengagement isn't the first option. Disengagement is the thing that you do when there's absolutely no other options open to you. The positives about this, though, that we found working with the communities upstream, is that loads of local dynamism there. There's lots of local organisations in DRC who want to get involved, or who are already involved in monitoring and due diligence in one way or another. They just struggle to get access to the downstream partners. We're working to really expand that network of civil society organisations and to get them greater recognition with the downstream, and ideally get them certified so that they can play a much clearer role in the international sort of system, really. So on to the next slide. Looking at the downstream, and the mid and the downstream, it should say, really. So refiners and jewelers in particular. We know jewelers aren't the only people to buy gold, but it's the community which we felt was the most important to access initially, because there's a clearer and more direct link than maybe in the IT sector, where the supply chain is much longer and it's a much more complicated supply chain. But we know that there's really big community, especially in the UK, of jewelers who want to get involved in fair trade. Sorry, that shouldn't say fair trade, in responsible gold. What we found talking to the refiners that we've brought together in a group is that they're nervous about the initial expense and the risk that making that initial decision to try and partner with the supply chain would bring. And doing that first know your customer process is really time consuming if you're going to do it properly. So that's a barrier. They don't even know where to start often when it comes to DRC, because it's such a big, complicated country with a messy reputation. And that's one of the areas that our project is really trying to help on, to shift the narrative and share a lot more information about the supply chains and the context, so that the refiners are much more comfortable in making those initial decisions to go in. And of course, the due diligence information we're getting from our due diligence partners, we've been able to share with the refiners to help them understand what it lowers the risk of them taking that initial first step, because they know more about what they're getting engaged in. And then just the practicalities of Congo, the remote location, the language, and all of that, really complicated. So again, our project is trying to break those barriers down by being the facilitation between the up and the downstream and breaking down those links. So I think I've covered really the opportunities as I've been talking. So maybe on to the next slide. And this is the last one now. So I know, Susie, you said talk a bit about bringing the gold to market. What would that look like? So here you go. We're not a supply chain actor. Like, we're not a stakeholder. We're not going to own the gold. We're not going to certify it. We're not going to brand it. That's for the supply chain actors to do. And again, you'll hear more from Greg on that in a minute. We are facilitating those relationships, right? We're catalysing the relationships, the commercial relationships between the cooperatives and the exporters, between them and the government of Congo, local banks, the refiners through our community of practice, and jewelers through our jewellery community. And we will support communications and marketing through that information sharing and sharing of material, so that you've got something to work with. We hope we'll see a pilot of gold in the coming weeks or months. We've been saying that for a little while. There are always unexpected items in the bagging area in Congo, so it's not always as simple as sticking to a time frame, but I think we're not that far off. and what we're working with the likely first refiner and with the exporter as well to ensure that there will be some gold available for jewelers to buy in the quantities that we hope you want to buy it. We're working with our jewelry community and starting to ask questions about form, quantity, time frame, logistics, and just the basics of how you would get the gold from that refiner to people who want to buy it. Price is something which everybody always asks about. That is something we can't control, but we hope we will bring together the different parties to be able to have those conversations and support those conversations where necessary. So I think that's everything. I hope I wasn't too long.
That's perfect. Lovely. Thank you so much, Rachel. I find it really fascinating how you're attacking both ends of the supply chain at the same time. I think that's like a really unique and sensible thing. And actually for jewelers, it means that we've got a clear understanding of the narrative, which I think what really gives the whole thing legs. So thank you very much. And I hope we're sharing in the chat as well. There's a monthly newsletter from global communities. So if anyone's interested on hearing more on a regular basis, then sign up for the newsletter. Perfect. Next, we have Duncan Marshall, who's joining us from Betts Metals, and he's operations manager. And Betts Metals is actually a refiner in the UK dealing with Fairtrade gold, Fairmined gold, and single mine origin gold. And what he's going to talk to us today about is the single mine origin gold, which is coming from the Hummingbird Resources Yanfo Lili gold mine in Mali. So Duncan, I'm going to hand over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I kind of feel like I'm on Dragon's Den and woefully unprepared compared with the last set of slides there. I've not really brought a lot of slide information today, just some photographs that hopefully will get shared in a few moments, just to sort of show where the mine was in Mali when the Hummingbird started. And it's a little bit of a process all the way through. I kind of wanted to start from where we got into responsibly sourced material, and Greg was the instigator behind that many years ago when I first met Greg, and he brought the first ever Fairtrade gold that I'd ever seen, ever come across, to us here in Buxton, and we refined that, and it made us realize at the time that we'd been in this industry since the late 1970s. So we've dealt with many aspects of the gold trade, and it made us realize that there was more to do and a better way of doing it. And so we got involved with Fairtrade, as you know, and we do Fairmined, and we do Welsh, Irish, Scottish gold, all completely segregated. And we were taken over about 6 years ago by the Betts company. And the Betts company had got a relationship with Hummingbird in that the two owners were brothers. And Charlie's, who's my boss, incentive to carry this on, this fair trade, the Fairmined, this provenance of gold, and a clear and transparent supply chain of precious metal, came at the right time with having Hummingbird really just about set up in Mali to start producing gold or start mining gold. So we looked at how we could do this, and you can see from the photographs that the people that were there were basically scavenging the ground, going down tens of meters on wagon banding straps to mine the gold. There's got to be a better way of doing that. And we know that fair trade and fair mind are the standards there at the moment. And we wanted to try and bring something that isn't going up against either of those, but something that works alongside. This is a corporate mine, and corporate mines can't be fair trade. So we wanted something that would offer people a transparency to the gold and back all the way through. And our experience with dealing with fair trade and fair mine gave us an idea and understanding of what people want. You know, they're wanting chain of custody, an audit trail, and trying to keep these costs to a minimum. So in 2017, Hummingbird broke ground. Back end of 2017, they poured the first amount of gold, which we received in early 2018. And at this point, SMO was a thought for the future and how we were going to put that out to the marketplace. And SMO is a brand. It's not a statement of anything else. The single mine origin idea is, I know, has been used elsewhere, but the idea was to have this come all the way through and showcase it to the jewelry trade in any level. So we're hopefully able to supply large companies or smaller companies, or even down to the artisanal jewelers that we currently deal with at the moment through Fairtrade and Fairmined exposure. So getting the no child labour, this clear trail of doing better as a corporate mine. SMO joined the World Gold Council and operates under its standards. The gold is not refined in the UK. It's refined metal ore and I think, what's the other one called? Argor, Soreus. And they are basically refining it and keeping it 1,000-ounce batches separate for us to use here in the UK and elsewhere, because we can sell it as fine gold without it coming to Buxton and turned into different alloys. This is fully audited trail all the way through, and there are several partners in that. We've got SGS on the ground in Mali doing the assaying. We've then got Aramet, who look at the mine output and volumes that are coming out of there. We've got G4S, people like that are supplying the security to the refiner. We've got Bureau Veritas, who are our auditors. The segregation keep through the LBMA refining process. And then we've got Baker Tilly, who are our auditors. Sorry for my hesitation there. There's quite a few to go through. The gold can be shipped directly to any client with full traceability, or it comes into the UK to us, where we can turn it into just about any alloy you can think of in just about any shape or form. We provide investment opportunity as well within this. So we can do coins, full design program there. We can do restoration alloys, which we've just done a 20 carat red alloy for a guy that's wanting to repair something. So we can offer quite a wide and varied metal base to our clients. And this comes from going from larger quantities to smaller ones. I think the smallest job we did the other week was 0.2 of a gram, which is not what we really want. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is offer everybody an opportunity to work with traceable or more responsibly sourced gold. We are by nature a recycler of material. When we all know the problems that come with recycling, but it's an option. We know that from our own refinery here in the UK, we can offer recycled gold, but it then comes with all these problems of certification, provenance, and every single layer adds cost. And where we're concerned is that although we provide recycled, Fairtrade, Fairmined, and SMO, that these costs are always what turn the majority of people away. And we don't want to turn anybody away. We want them, if they're going to join a path of change, they can start with the recycled side and move through. And then because of the options we give them, they've got free choice to take on whichever one suits or fits their needs the best. So we are trying to give people the provenance for every single part We don't try to do too much on the recycle just because of the extra cost involved there. So like the SMO, well, Fairtrade, we know what provenance we've got there. Fairmined, the same. With SMO, we are using a QR code with correspondence. We've got obviously the website. There are information packs available. The QR code is a developing thing. We've got batches of material that are coming out of Mali. It's very difficult to give everybody an exacting batch number in some circumstances, although that can be provided, just because of the fact that when it reaches the UK and we start recycling it internally, that those batch numbers become huge. So at the moment, the QR code gives you the information of where the metals come from. Currently, there are 2 mines. One is Yanfalila, which is the main source of the gold. We've got another mine on side with us at the minute from Endeavour, which is the Itty mine. And each QR code will give you where your gold has come from. Hopefully in the future, as we develop the QR code and the information, what we will be able to do is provide even more detailed information and links to all the other projects that are taking place out there in Mali, which are many, because obviously when the mine opened up, we displaced indigenous peoples there, but those people have been taken on either working in marketplaces that have been set up, beekeeping, poultry farms. We've got education out there. We sponsor 20 teachers across 10 villages. And there are numerous other things, far too many to mention. But the whole thing is designed to grow, to develop, to take what is a corporate business into an area that has got a resource that we need, that we want, and that we're wanting to do and extract better for them, for us, and for the jewelers in the future. I think that we currently run at 95% Indigenous people are employed within the mine. We have healthcare schemes there. A new health centre has been built. There are, like I say, there are numerous commitments. Sorry, was that me? So then there are a lot of other partnerships that we're having with the local people to ensure that the displacement from mining gold has given them a different future, more a sustainable future for themselves, because even when the mine is long gone, these crops and other operations will still be there. I think apart from that, what we do here in the UK with the gold is give everybody this opportunity to share in this traceable material. We in Buxton manufacture, like I say, many different types of material, from sheet, strip, wire, grain, investment products such as the coin you see in front of you. And recently we started CNCing wedding rings, and we're all self-taught on that. During the COVID period, we got all this equipment, but no technical backup. So unfortunately, I had to read the manual, and more than once. And from that, we are able to offer an ever-growing portfolio. We're currently looking at chain. We're looking at findings. Some of these are coming through at the moment. Hopefully, more and more products as we go on. As for that, I think quoting somebody else, if we do what we do well, hopefully we'll bring some good to everybody within the supply chain. I think that's it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Fascinating insight. I'd be keen to talk a little bit more about the segregation of refining, but maybe we'll come back to that at the questions at the end, if that's okay.
I thought that would probably be part of the questioning side of things.
Yeah.
There's so much information to go through it all. I've got reams of paper here and didn't really know which bits to add.
No,
everybody can come and see it. And by the way, if I don't answer everybody's question today, and if I don't get everything across. We can continue the conversation and pass on information. But anybody that's interested in coming to Buxton to the refinery, you're more than welcome to arrange a visit and come and see what we do. Come and see the 7 individuals that are here that provide quite a considerable amount of material to the jewellery trade.
I think that sounds like a fair luxury road trip. Let's all head to Buxton.
You're more than welcome.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Duncan. So next, our last speaker is Greg Valerio, who is well known in the retraceable gold industry. He's a social entrepreneur with an intimate knowledge from mine all the way to market, having worked with Fairtrade and Fairmined, Oro Verde, and many other well-known responsible sources of gold. And actually, he was awarded an MBE in 2016 for services to Fairtrade gold and artisanal gold mining communities in South America and Africa. And uniquely, he is actually an ethical jeweler as well. So we'd like to welcome Greg.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I get the honor of being a member of something that doesn't exist anymore. So, but yeah, I mean, it's amazing really just to hear what Rachel's been saying and Duncan, and, you know, just to cast one's mind back on all the early discussions and how the whole responsible sourcing world plus traceable supply chains have grown and matured and developed and embedded themselves as a narrative into the industry. I think it's remarkable. So it's just fantastic to hear all the amazing stuff that's going on. My task here is to talk a little bit about peace gold. And the peace gold process in Eastern DRC is, it originates from a slightly different location. Most of the discussions that we've been having over the years have been kind of intentionally about responsible sources, quite rightly, whether that's gemstones or gold, etc. The Peace Gold Initiative started really with the recognition that the biggest obstacle to progress in the Congo was violence and conflict. And in some way, until we address that baseline social dysfunction, which goes all the way back to through to colonial times, we'll never ever get to a place where the prosperity that exists in that country is able to benefit the people of that country. Because at the moment, the resources of the land don't benefit the people of the land, they benefit everybody else. So I was approached in 2013 by Peace Direct, a UK charity who do a lot of peace building, do a lot of capacity building with communities in conflict affected areas, to say, look, we've got all these ex-militia demobilized and we need to put them to some sort of productive work. Because the biggest challenge that they had, particularly for young men, was once they're demobilized from the militia, there's no work for them. So they sit around idly for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 12 months, however long it might be. And eventually they end up going off and getting into more mischief. Worst case scenario, go back to militia activity. So the one thing that they have in the Eastern DRC, in Ituri province, which is where myself and others are working, is gold. And that's not an exaggeration. After a heavy rainstorm in the Nizi-Iga barrier area, you can literally pick the stuff up off the ground. It's alluvial, it's on the surface. So in 2013, 2 recently demobilized groups who actually previously had been in conflict with each other, they sat down in a room. We did a series of discussions over 3 days, which was fascinating, entertaining, and a little bit intimidating at the same time, to think I'm in a room with these guys who, well, let's not go into their background. And they agreed to work together to move towards responsible mining and responsible gold mining and legal gold mining, which at the time was an aspiration. It certainly wasn't an achievement. And that was as far as it got. And then in 2017, 4 years later, there's a subsequent follow-up conversation, which is that group, those two militia groups have formed two cooperatives, and they are now in the process of getting their own licenses to operate, to mine gold. Would you come back and start to work with them on getting three simple things in place? One was legal cooperatives, so the legal formalization process. Let's move from illicit, quasi-legal, and often illegal activity to a formalized, legally recognized structure, which in that context was a cooperative. That's the construct that they both groups wanted to go down. Two, we would like to get the gold production mercury free. Obviously, in the background of all of gold mining is the use of toxic chemicals. We all know about it, and yet for some reason we never seem to be able to migrate off of it. So the second objective of the Peace Gold Initiative was mercury-free mining, which sounds complicated, but actually is a technical solution which is quite easy to implement. The issue for us around mercury, as I think we've discovered in all the different other locations that we've worked in over the years, but certainly in the Congo, is the addiction to mercury is cultural, it's not operational. We can get better gold retention and better gold quantities out of a mercury-free system than we can out of mercury usage. So that's a cultural and educational and a health piece. And then the third thing, obviously, was to build an export platform for that material into the international market and create a system appropriate to context that will allow us to drive the value of these trades, the value of the gold coming out of the ground, back into community development and peace building. So for us, the foundation always started with and remains focused on whatever we do, whatever steps we take, is it building social cohesion and building the capacity to maintain peace in the area. And obviously the Center for Resolution Conflict, CRC, who I work with on the ground, and they're a remarkable organization. They have a very high trust environment with all the stakeholders in that part of the world, and that includes active militia groups at the moment. For those of you that are unaware, we currently have in Ituri province something which is called a state of siege, which essentially is like a military lockdown, because over the last 18 months there has been an explosion, and Rachel is probably much better placed to talk about this in political detail than me. There's been a proliferation of militia activity over the last 18 months to 2 years. When I left there in February 2020, just before the COVID lockdowns came in the West, there was one active group in the area. When I went back in June 21, there were 5. The legacy of that being that actually one of our cooperatives, unfortunately, and this is again an illustration of when you say how do you quantify peace, you have to quantify peace in terms of action, not aspiration. So one militia group got quite active in one of the areas where one of our cooperatives was operating. So the cooperative just shut the operation down. They mothballed it, and they've gone back home, and they will go back to work when it is safe to do so. Reason being, they do not want to get sucked into the kind of conflicts which are proliferating in the area at the moment. So again, it sounds negative to say we lost a cooperative to the conflict, but actually we haven't lost the cooperative, we haven't lost the community. What that community has done, because of the input that CRC and others have had into it over the years in terms of conflict resolution training, it has empowered, we've seen the empowerment of those communities to stay out of the conflict. So actually it's a very positive thing in context. Our other group, Komolobani, hasn't had to close, hasn't had to shut down, and that is very active, and we've made some really good strides with them. To give you, again, just to throw a few statistics at you, we work with 1,600 miners, and when you add their families, because often this can often be a family impacted, community impacted piece, we're working with over 3,000 community members, family and community members, of which 1,600 of those would be miners. A high percentage of that number are demobilized militia. And the other factor is, again, across the two cooperatives, the two militia groups, which was, and at the time that this was happening, it was primarily an ethnically driven thing. It's not so much now. And that's a discussion for another day. But the two primarily ethnic groups that live in the area decided to cross the boundaries and work together in the different cooperatives. So again, another practical illustration of how is the peace being built. You've got historically warring groups, literally, now working together in the mutual interest and benefit of one another. Komolobani, with the help of Zabu Safi, and to this we have to give big credit to Zabu Safi, just got the first national accreditation for their cooperative. That's a very significant step in terms of our initial objective of legalization. That is the final, that's a kind of the big national tick box that needs to take place. And then very practically, that's the first cooperative, gold mining cooperative in a Turi province that has had national accreditation. So you can imagine they're cock a hoop with pride about what they've achieved there. And critically, they paid for it out of their own money. So it costs $5,000 to get national accreditation. And one of the things that we set up at the beginning of this initiative with was what we called a 1% social fund. So both cooperatives agreed that they would set aside 1% of their traded value, not profit, traded value, into a social fund, which they set up a committee around. And out of that committee would then spend that money on the development priorities which the community identified. And again, we extracted that principle primarily from the Fairtrade Fairmined process, where you have Fairtrade premium committees, but this is all run, all administrated, and all invested into by the cooperatives themselves. So, and that's their commitment to the process. And so far, they put aside $12,000 US into that social fund, of which 5 of that went on national accreditation. That national accreditation allows them to do something very simple: open a bank account. Because again, one of the biggest challenges that are on the ground is the way the transactions take place, and we know this because we're well versed in this. But you know, cash for gold at the pit head is not a good way of managing transparent financial transactions. So our cooperatives will obviously require bank accounts, but then international buyers require money transfers into nationally registered and accredited bank accounts. So this is going to help with the financial transaction and traceability piece. So bank accounts have opened, miners are being impacted for peace, national accreditation is being granted. We've got mercury-free production. We set up processing plants, and again, one of the things that we did early on in our intervention was to get the guys from the Congo to travel to Uganda to visit what was the Fairtrade certified mine in Busia. And it's great when you put miners together with miners and you let the peers do their work, because you can just sit back, you put all the ingredients in the mix and you just let them get on with it, which is what they did. And one of the biggest takeaways from that miner exchange program that we did, that miner exchange visit at the very front end of the Peace Gold Initiative, was none of our groups in the Congo had ever used something very simple, such as a concrete washing basin. So when they saw the concrete washing basins in Busia, they thought, oh, we can do that. And so it helps them to retain water. It was preventing mercury, because people still use mercury in the area. It was preventing mercury from leaching into the environment. And obviously it keeps the site, the gold processing site, much tidier and cleaner than it would have normally been. So we now have a situation where we have that social fund in place, we have legality in place, we have a functioning social fund and committee in place. We've got a mercury-free production process in place. At the moment, our one cooperative is saying that they are able to produce anywhere between 10 to 12 kilos of gold every month to 6 weeks. So that's quite a considerable volume given their size, but it's an incredibly rich area for gold. It's ridiculous how much gold there is. So that's now in position, and in over the last 12 months, we have been working very closely with Zabu Safi on developing that international sort of export platform, which, you know, as Rachel alluded to in her presentation, is not straightforward. It is complicated. And we continue to work on the transactional framework in terms of how are we going to do this. I believe, and Rachel, correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think the last two pieces of the equation for Peace Gold's first pilot export will be, one, we need a courier that can move the gold out of Bunya into probably Entebbe, and it looks like we found somebody. So we're checking them out face to face in May. And then the other thing is we need site verification, which is basically the sites need to be green flagged, and we are awaiting the formal mission, which is facilitated by the United Nations Monescu peace building process there. They facilitate that. They've agreed to pay for it, which is very good of the United Nations. They're very kind of them in that regard. But there's the practical details of people actually have to turn up and do the boots on the ground verification. And that's one of the last two bits that we're waiting for. With those two things in place, we have a robust transactional framework with all the due diligences. We should be ready to begin to build going forward in terms of a pilot export. And then most importantly, we recognize, and again, this is from the wealth that we've learned over the years through all the different initiatives we've all been involved with, the first trade is the most difficult and the easiest at the same time, because all the energy is invested into making it happen for the first time. We know we will have been successful when we're doing it 3, 4, 5 times a year. When we get to our third trade, our fourth trade, and we flush the pipe and we've got all the requisite pieces in place for transparency and traceability, both product wise and financial traceability and transparency as well, then we know we've got a robust system which will be able to last the test of time.
I think now might be a good time to pause, actually, because I think we've generated a lot of questions, Greg. That was
sure
so fascinating that everyone's got something to say. So Liz or Clara, are you going to lead us through some of the questions?
Yeah, certainly I can do that. And I think, Greg, naturally we'll start with you because you've just spoken. Let me just pull up the questions. So we had one question from Caroline. She was really interested in your background and whether it was more in jewelry production, mining, or peace resolution. So there was some interest around kind of your background. If you could talk to that a little bit.
Well, my background.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
in terms of what?
Sort of jewelry production or mining or peace resolution, or was it all kind of like a thing that all kind of came together at the same time?
Oh, my word.
In 1 minute or less.
Keeping it brief if possible, Greg.
I don't know. I don't know how. I mean, I must be psychotic doing this for a living. But no, I mean, initially I started out with a small fair trade business back in the early to mid 90s called Cred. And we were buying arts and crafts on the ground. The only thing that sold with any meaningful profitability was jewelry. So I ended up with an intentional fair trade jewelry company. The only problem was it had not been done before and nobody knew what the hell that meant. So we spent quite a number of years, myself and the team, working out what fair trade in jewelry meant. And I mean, very practically, and the penny dropped. The gold penny dropped when I was invited. I was approached by Oro Verde in Colombia to visit them and to visit their eco mining system out in the jungles in Colombia. And I bought the first lot of gold there, turned that into wedding rings, and that's where I met Duncan and what was Capella, now Betts Metals, because we needed to find a refiner that was mad enough to do traceable refining. And they were crazy enough to say yes, and it really began through that. And then that snowballed into more miners wanting to do it, more jewelers wanting to do it. Within the first 6 months of launching Oro Verde wedding rings, we had dozens of jewelers in the UK and then from America saying, how do you do it? We want to do it. How can we get involved? Blah, blah, blah. And it just snowballed from there, and it snowballed into fair trade and standards and mining and more mines and more jewelers and, on and on and on and on and on it goes.
Thank you. That's really useful. And I'm sure everyone appreciated that, especially Caroline for her question. So the other questions we had quite a few questions around kind of mercury-free extraction. There's some questions around whether it's actually better to extract done with mercury or not. And also, I think someone also had a question about how that actually works. How can you actually mine without mercury?
Yeah, so the mercury system, the photos that were up at the beginning, you will have seen a sort of a box with water going into it. That's actually what we call the gold. It's a gold conker is what it's referred to. That's its brand name. But basically it's a micro sluice. And so as I say, because the nature of the deposits in this part of the world, you have alluvial deposits, which are kind of surface free gold deposits. But then obviously we have, they also mill the gold, and then they have to extract the gold from the gold dust, which they mill from the rock. Now, mercury is traditionally the way that they do that because mercury amalgams with gold very well. So you use the mercury, you mix it often by hand in those contexts. That work, because it's not big physical work, is often done by women and children. And they're amalgamating in buckets, in kind of, kitchen bowl, plastic kitchen bowls in a lot of cases, rock dust with gold and mercury by hand. And then eventually when the mercury gets to a certain consistency, which you do need your fingertips to be able to know when your mercury is engorged, I am told, you then know that it's ready to be burned to release the gold from the mercury. So you end up with the gold. Now, we all know mercury is a neurotoxic substance. If you're a miner, your hands are often quite dry and cracked and cut. So you're handling mercury straight into raw wounds in your hand. It's not an exaggeration to say I have, and I know many others have seen, pregnant women handling mercury on a regular basis. When you burn the mercury, the methyl mercury, which is the vapor that comes from the burning, that goes into the air. You're breathing that in. That's toxic. It's often burned outdoors, which is a very tiny mitigation. But in some cases, particularly when the weather's not great, they're burning it indoors. Not a good thing. And of course, the health implications of mercury, particularly for pregnant women. The placenta does not screen out the toxicity that is in mercury, so it goes straight into the child, which leads to all kinds of issues around pregnancy, premature births, stillbirths, deformities and disabilities at birth. It's a long issue. How does our system work? Basically, it works through gravimetric concentration. So the first piece of kit that you put in is basically a massive, great big spinning drum, which has got special ribbed lining inside. So it's like a top-loading washing machine, essentially, which spins off of a washing machine motor. So it's that simple, and it goes round and round and round and round centrifugally, pushing all the material to the ribs inside, allowing the water to escape at the bottom. And then you sluice it out in the bowl, leaving you your first concentrate. That concentrate is then spun again to concentrate it down until eventually you end up with a bowl of what looks like black sand in the case of where we are. And then it goes through a highly calibrated, and by high calibration, I mean the flow of water on the pump into a micro sluice over a specially lined rubber lining. Again, you will have seen in the photos that we showed earlier, there was a long sluice made out of carpet. Well, this is a well-designed rubber matting which captures all the free gold. And then again, you then end up with a second and a third round of concentrate until eventually you end up with a small bowl of high concentrate free gold, which we then remove all the iron and dust particles with a magnet.
Wow,
and we run the whole thing off a diesel generator.
That sounds amazing. Thank you for
and
that.
We get 20% better gold retention doing that than we do using mercury.
Yeah, that really is fascinating. It's certainly the first time I've heard that kind of detailed description, so I'm sure everybody else would have really appreciated that for sure. And just quickly, before we pop on to the other questions with the other speakers, there was some real interest about how far or how close you think you are from having the gold available, and how that will be kind of traded in terms of market prices. So in other words, is there going to be like a premium model in the same way that Fairtrade and Fairmined?
Not from Peace Gold's end. I don't know what Zabu Safi's strategy is at this stage, but I know Peace Gold, we're not putting premiums on, no.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us all of that information, for your time. I think we have some questions for Rachel, if you've got time, Rachel. So just a quick one. Are you working with other existing schemes like the Fairtrade and Fairmined schemes to learn kind of the work already done and the challenges overcome when developing supply chains for artisanal gold?
Yeah, it's a good question. And of course, we're definitely learning from other other schemes and other projects that have been put in place in the past. Particularly the most recent US government projects in DRC, but also organisations like the RAGS Forum, which was set up to bring together different supply chain actors in looking at Congolese responsible gold from Congo previously. So we've talked to all of them, and also quite a lot of the people we're working with have got experience of working with Fairtrade and Fairmined in the past. So yes, we're very conscious that we're building on a lot of other work. We definitely don't want to start from scratch. And in fact, I guess in some ways, this project is acknowledging that Fairtrade and Fairmined gold is probably out of reach for most of the ASM community in Congo at the moment, because it's such a high standard, and the base that we're starting from in Congo is very low. As you heard from Greg, there's been decades of conflict, and before that, decades of dictatorship and misrule, and such limited infrastructure, such a huge country with huge levels of poverty, and with the education system has collapsed before and during the war, and so we're really starting in some ways from an incredibly low base. So Fairtrade and Fairmined are up here, very aspirational. So what we're trying to do with the work through the Zahabu Safi is to focus on this idea of continuous improvement, accepting it's not perfect, and it's going to be a long time before it is anywhere near perfect. But the best way to help improve the situation in the mining communities in Eastern Congo is by engaging with them. It's by supporting the communities, helping them, as Peace Direct and Peace Gold program is doing, building capacity, helping them understand the demands of the market, some bringing in new equipment. As from a global communities perspective, they're bringing in their experience of developing strong cooperatives and helping set up management systems in the cooperative, so that accounting and finance and just the day-to-day running is done in a more equitable and effective, efficient way. So these are the really basic things that we need to get in place first before we can think about sort of Fairtrade and Fairmined but there may be something to aim for in the future. So continuous improvement and really ongoing engagement is the aim for us at the moment.
Sorry, just popping in to say Greg just mentioned the craft code from Fairmined. Is this something you're also working with?
Yeah, so that's what we've heard from a lot of the jewelry community that we've talked to, is that it's obviously a recognized standard, and it's very much built around this idea of continuous improvement. So yeah, the craft code is, we've worked with the cooperative that Greg's been talking about to support training on the craft code, and doing the same with other cooperatives. Continuous improvement is part of is at the heart of what the craft code is trying to do, acknowledging that there's a long way to go before those Fairmined, Fairtrade standards are reached.
Amazing, thank you, Rachel. I believe we've got a question from the floor from our Arabelle. Do you want to pop on, Arabelle, and ask your questions?
Hi, yes. This is from basically for Duncan. It's just, I feel a bit like a contradiction also in the presentations. My question was, and it's more like a kind of a comment. I just wonder what is really the value of SMO in comparison with artisanal gold. Because in SMO, it just feels that the CSM program, the corporate social responsibility, is just an extended program, it's more sophisticated. But I just wonder really how it greatly impacts and empowers the extended community, the numbers of people that are there. And I just want to say that as well, saying thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, because, you've been supporting this community forever. You've recycled gold for me, for everyone in the industry. So at least the ones that care to know where our gold comes from. So I think the traceability factor, I think, is amazing. It's just like great that vets, are doing it. But I just wonder, on the bigger scheme of things, of how much it affects and it impacts the communities. How do you perceive that?
Obviously, anywhere where you take a shovel or a digger, you're going to impact on any community and any environment. From the photographs we showed earlier, there were a lot of artisanal miners already there, and there is a community already there. The mine itself has impacted quite heavily on the area, and as a corporate mine, it's employed Oxford University to check out any flora or fauna that may be endangered. A lot of other research took into place of what contaminants may be possible, what contamination may be possible within the area. And yes, damage is done to the area, as in any mining operation. And to compensate in some way, what the mine has done is employed over 1,000 individuals from the area. I think there's a community of around 5,000 in that particular area. There's over 100 ladies employed in a gardening initiative that all the topsoil that's been used was replanted, so the mine could grow crops, and that food is sold back to the mine or sold into the community or for self-use. There's, I think, over 900 people employed on the periphery of the mine. And then I think there's even more than that. I mean, this is just detail that I've been given by the mine itself. And I think that's growing day on day, week on week. I think the thing is, in the area, when things like this take place, other communities gravitate towards what's seen as some prosperity, and so there are ever growing possibilities for people within the area, whether that be medical training or training as teachers. Has that gone some way to answering your question?
Yes, but I still feel it's like a sophisticated CSR program, that it is not from bottom up, it's from top down. And at the end of the day, the money is going to be taken by the corporation, not really by the people that live in the land.
True. It does become top down. Any sort of corporate engagement like that will sort of naturally progress that, because they've got the deep pockets. They can, instead of like a Fairmined or a Fairtrade collective growing and growing and growing, this is sort of, I think the company that owned the mineral rights at the time were called Goldfields. I think they'd done all the exploration work. Hummingbird came along and purchased this site from them, and obviously you are going to affect those people. But those people were mining gold and selling gold at the mine head for such a small percentage of what it's worth. What they've done now is given them other opportunities to earn more money, and less dangerously so, from not going down a great big deep hole on a wagon banding strip, and almost giving them a future of as long as mine site is open, and hopefully after that. Yes, you're right. I think that it is top down. It is a corporate business, but at the same time, it's trying to do something that's already going to be there better. And I think the only way to do that is taking on stance like they have done now, and grow with that, and hopefully the world of mining, whether it be gold or whatever anybody's digging out of the ground, take on the same attitude that yes, we might be taking something away, but we're bringing something of value to them as well. I can't see how we can stop mining altogether. We've just got to be better at it, and from the consumer, from us as a sort of the middleman, where I need this material to provide a living to the people that to do the work that we do. we're part of that sustainable chain. We need the consumer to put pressure on us. We need to put pressure on the mines. And as we're sort of associated with all those sort of factions, we're in a position where we can apply pressure ourselves. And instead of just applying pressure, we've tried to come up with a way of doing it and doing it better.
I think it's a great example. For me, it's a danger when people put at the same level gold that comes from small scale miners and artisanal mining to SMO, because I've had jewelers, for example, that was working with Fairtrade, and then they decided it's too difficult. I've stopped. I'm going to start working with bets because it's easier. So for me, it's just not comparison. I do appreciate that it is there because it really shows the industry what it can be done. What I'm afraid of is the parallelism and the danger that we have in greenwashing this. Like I think it should be. I think we need to make a difference between what is one and what is the other, and what are the benefits of it.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I'm pleased nobody take on for 1 minute. I think we're the only refiner that currently runs with all the options, or as many options as possible. And we there's all these other wonderful opportunities coming about, but at the same time, the monetary aspect of it. I mean, this is not my business. We've got to be sustainable ourselves, and we set off with Fairtrade, and we've made that work in the UK, where I think the majority of our competitors. I don't want to be rude to anybody, but some people sit on the fence. I can only do what I can do, but we supply anything and everything in Fairtrade, and the same in Fairmined. We're not trying to limit anybody's ability to take these on. But as you're aware, if you've got an artisanal jeweler, their base product is so expensive that if they can't afford Fairtrade, we're at least giving them an option, which is not the best option. We're not saying it's the cure, but it's an option to be part of it, and hopefully their businesses grow, and they then can choose a higher level. And that's really the aim, is that the SMO is a corporate business, is doing what it's doing. It's trying to do it better, but not trying to turn people away from Fairtrade or Fairmined. Quite the opposite. It's trying to give somebody a path to a better solution. But if you're setting off as a jeweler or an artisan, you're already an artisanal jeweler, and your product is, the base metal is that expensive. There's all these other expenses on the top. We're trying not to make it even more top heavy. We're trying to make sure that the money goes the other way as much as possible.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you,
Duncan. I think actually the key to that is transparency, isn't it? It's like just being open about the conversation, and actually that forums like this are really good for that transparency. And I've got a quick last question that's actually Stuart's echoing something that I wanted to ask as well. I've always wanted to know, where do the other metals that you alloy with come from? And is there a fairly traded source of these metals? I'd love to know.
Oh, it's been one of the biggest heartaches, really, of what we do. You set off and you concentrate on what you know, and that's the gold. And then you start looking at the silver and the copper and the zinc, and then there's all the other elements that come in. We use germanium, gallium, all sorts of bits and pieces, palladiums. Platinums are used, and especially over the last month with what's happened in Ukraine, and then knowing that materials come out of places like Russia, and you think to yourself, oh my God, where do ours come from? We can confidently say that our gold is either recycled or it comes from somebody else. So say an artisanal jeweler sent their own gold in and they want that refining. Our silver comes through our silver refining plant in Birmingham, where we recycle NHS medical X-ray film. So not all of the silver, the majority of silver comes through that process. We're trying to do that and segregate that better, so we can actually state that that's what's in your product as it goes along, whether it's just something that's coming along through the path. But as like everything else, COVID's got in the way of a great deal of things. As for the copper, copper comes from Finland. The zinc comes from India. Some of the other metals, I'm waiting on transparency from the suppliers, just purely because we want to give out a statement of effect about Russia and where we get. But obviously, we're waiting for numerous other people to get back to us. We attempted to recycle copper and made quite a mess. And we got some blue sludge and some other ingredients that weren't really good enough. And so what we're trying to do is find partners we kind of stop doing what we don't know what we're doing and get somebody else that knows what they're doing to be interested in doing what we're doing with what we know what we're doing, if you get what I'm trying to say. You kind of got to draw a line somewhere and say, this is beyond me. You know, I don't know what I'm doing with that. I do know I need good, pure ingredients so the alloys hold up when they're on somebody's bench or they're on somebody's machine.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's insightful. It's a question that's actually always been in my head since I've been a jeweler. So thank you for taking the time to answer. And we've come to the end of our session, guys. Thank you so much to Rachel, Duncan, and to Greg. I think you'll all be behind me when I say that was just really fascinating. And we could talk for hours. But if you guys have any further questions, we're going to follow up with an email as well. I just wanted to quickly mention our next open house pledge session is on the 12th of May at 1 p.m. And if you've not heard about the Fair Luxury Pledge, please take a moment. I'm sure someone will share in the chat. Now would be a great time to take a pledge, maybe following on from this session, looking into your own supply chain. That would be a perfect start. Thank you so much for your time today, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.